Bottburg and Hamburg. The exits are over the wings, and in the front of the airplane, the exits in the back of the airplane are not used. Thank you very much. Thank you for flying with telemetric air.
Very quick introduction. This is not a huge pitch about telemetry deck, but I just want to introduce where we are coming from. Most of you will know telemetry deck. We are a privacy-first analytics service for apps and other products such as web applications. Most people use us to count users, count retention numbers, find the journeys that users take throughout their apps, and improve their applications. But of course, you can also use telemetry deck to find out what languages your customers are speaking. And that's something that we're talking about today with Jeehut, who I'm going to introduce in a second. If you are unfamiliar with telemetry deck, go to telemetrydeck.com and check it out. My name is Daniel Jilk. I am the co-founder of Telemetry Deck together with Lisa, who is also in this chat today as a viewer. I used to be a CTO, and I'm now I'm also kind of a CTO. I used to be someone who works a lot with mobile development, especially iPhone and iOS development, but also lots of server stuff. And so now I kind of do the same, but in my own company, which is pretty rad, to be honest. All right, Jeehut, over to you.
Hello world, I'm Jeehut, and you know me from socials by Jeehut. That's also how you say my name. That's why it's my socials. And yeah, I'm an indie developer since beginning of 2022, and I'm trying to write my own apps there. And since the Vision Pro was announced this year, I started also doing spatial apps. So I do this spatial first approach where I try to basically write every app also for the Vision Pro to basically embrace the new platform. And yeah, you can see I've worked for an agency for 4 years where I worked on many apps, I think even more than 100, I guess. I never really counted, but that's probably the number. And then I went to a different company, a product company, where I basically led or created a mobile Android and iOS team. Yeah. And speaking of this webinar, this is my first webinar I'm doing. Why am I here as an expert for localization? This is my localization background. So you can see I have built, I have worked on many localization tools. Maybe you know BartyCrouch, that's like an open source tool that you can use that is posted on GitHub, which has like over 1,000 stars. So I think thousands of developers are already using that. I've also contributed to other projects that are related to localization, like SwiftGen, which is a tool that creates code from your strings files. I worked on an app called RemafoX, which you can see on the top right. That's the icon of RemafoX. And I used to develop that before Apple came and Sherlocked it last year at WWDC with string catalogs. And I thought, okay, they Sherlock not all of it, they Sherlock like 70% of it. And I felt like, okay, the rest, I can make a new app from that and build upon that. And that's TranslateKit, my latest app, which I'm working on right now, and which you're also going to, yeah, see, maybe hear more about later. These are all my apps. I've actually worked on 7 apps and released many apps, and 7 of them have been released in the last 5 months, which you can, they are listed here, and you can see they are all localized. You might notice that some of them have just one language or some have more languages. That is a question I think we will get into later. But yeah, these are my apps. If you want to check them out, I'd be happy to, yeah, see your feedback. And yeah, that's basically it. And they are all localized, which means that I'm trying to, yeah, use my own app and use my own thing that I'm trying to say here, which is all apps should be localized. That was on the slide before. That's basically my mantra. I think we should all localize apps, and we're going to discuss why today.
Fantastic. But Jeehut, I have a very unexpected question for you. Like, why? Why should all apps be localized?
Well, yeah, I've been asked this question also from people who I've met, other developers. They are tending to ask me, like, why do you do this? Like, you're the localization guy. Why do you do this all the time? And really, it just came to me basically because I was trying to make it easier when I worked for an agency. I tried to make it easier for apps to become localized because it was kind of tedious. There were all these strings files you had to add. Then when you wanted to localize a string, it was really complicated. You had to do NS localized string. You had to copy the key, add it to the language files, and then you had to add it to each language file separately. It was really a mess. And I just wanted to write a tool that makes that easier. And that's how BartyCrouch came to be. But from there, it grew, like many people started using it. And I think to me, it's just obvious that I want my app to be used by everyone. To me, it ends up to be an accessibility topic. When I see my parents, they don't speak English. If I write my apps only in English and I don't localize them, then they can't use it. My mother-in-law, for example, she doesn't even speak German, even though she lives here, which is a different separate story, but she needs it in Turkish. And then you have like all these languages that you need to add. And I just thought to myself, hey, make it as easy as possible so no one has an excuse to skip localization. And that's why we should localize, because of accessibility. Short answer. Oh, I can't hear you?
Yes, because I'm muted. Okay, so more people can actually use and access our apps. Fantastic.
Absolutely, yeah.
Let's go to the basics. So, but like from beginning principles, what even is localization? Like, is it just translating an app? Like, if yes, how do I do that?
I would define localization as the process of reaching your entire potential target audience. So that's also like when you saw my slides before, I had some apps, for example, my Vision Pro apps, they are just localized in one language. So to me, localization does not mean you have to localize it to every language or to more languages. It means you reach your entire target audience, and that basic language and region and culture is not coming in your way. It's not like a hurdle for users to use your app. So if you have an app that really is only for people who speak English, in this case, because the Vision Pro is only available in the US right now, really everybody who buys one either lives there or has bought it from there, so they probably know English somehow. And therefore, I don't have to localize that app to more. I have another app that is localized to 7 languages. You might ask, why 7? When I could localize it to 40, 50, 100, whatever. In that specific case, my content, that's the crossword game. I have like a crossword game where you can create crossword puzzles. And the content I have in that app needs to be localized as well. Because if I just make the UI German, for example, and the crossword game questions, like Harry Potter questions that you can create there, are still asking for English stuff, some users might be able to use them, but then not all. And then in that case, I have to think, okay, how much can I really handle as a single developer, as an indie developer? So I opted for 7 languages, and I also excluded some languages where crossword puzzle creation doesn't make that much sense, like Chinese, Japanese, where the characters are so different and you can't really create crossword puzzles. So you really need to think about everything there. And at the end of the day, localization is reaching your entire potential audience.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like you want to like everyone who really is interested as a potential customer or user for your app, you want them to be able to decide to use your app and not be blocked by the fact that they don't speak the language.
Exactly.
We talked about, like, before we started the show, I wanted to say, before we started the webinar, we talked a little bit about let's construct this up from the very basics. So what I know from localization is basically, instead of writing individual words and sentences into your user interface directly, like for example a button that would say save, you don't like write it, like put the label save directly on the button. Instead, you add a reference of some sort, and then you have a separate file for English, and that file for English says this button says save, and then in the German version of that file, it would say this button says speichern. Is that how it works? Like most of our viewers will probably know this already, but like let's just go a little bit into how this works.
Yeah, basically, what you said was right, even for iOS developers, which I think most of the viewers here are. But even in other languages, like when you use something like Ember.js, I used Ruby on Rails. It's always you have some kind of module that you add into your UI, and then you can basically use some shortcut to tell the system, okay, this is a text that should be localized, because not every text in code needs to be localized, but those that need to be, you have to mark
That's for
some.
my linter.
Yeah. And basically what you could do, like as an iOS developer, you used to use something like NS localized string to mark, okay, this is a text that can be localized. And if you're working in the interface builder, basically the interface builder would always default to everything is localized, but then you could not opt out of that. And that was like when you had a button or let's say you have a label where you just put like version column, and then you have another label where you put the version in. You don't want that text to be localized because that's going to be dynamically changed in your code. That stuff like that, I try to automate and simplify with BartyCrouch. That's what BartyCrouch was about. But things have changed last year for iOS developers and specifically because we have string catalogs now. And the thing that most people maybe have not realized about string catalogs is it turns around the source of truth. Because it used to be like that you would have the translation source of truth in your strings file or YAML file or whatever that is in your application framework. And now Apple basically said, we want to turn that around, and your source code, which is your SwiftUI code or your Swift code in general, that is the source of truth. And when you write something like a button and then save there, this text save is already like the localization key, basically what we had before, because it extracts that. And how does it know that this is a localizable key when it's just a string? It's under the hood, it's not just a string. That's what people often don't realize about SwiftUI in particular, is that in SwiftUI, when you pass a string literal, like save, to some APIs, you're not actually passing a string object. It's not creating a string object. It's creating a localized string key object. It's a type that's kind of hidden inside SwiftUI. You don't really see it, but they're like each SwiftUI, you view like button, label, picker, everything has multiple overloads for their initializers. And the overload that always gets preferred is the one with localized string key. So if you just put a string literal there, it will automatically detect, okay, this can be localized, and it puts it into the string catalog. And that's really cool. And that's the magic that Apple has created nowadays. So it's become simpler.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I've kind of noticed that myself when I started working with SwiftUI, and then I was like, oh yeah, okay, this is actually way more powerful than it used to be. But this might be a question for later, but so that also means that I shouldn't just write save on there, because save is very ambiguous, and instead I should use some kind of path system or something, some key for the translation that I want to use here.
That's a good question for talking about best practices there. And it used to be a best practice to have semantic keys, to have something like, for example, you want to know the context so you can translate it properly. Instead of just writing save there, you might write something like onboarding dot page one dot save button dot title.
That's how I do it always. So that's now deprecated, is what you're saying.
I would not say directly deprecated, but it's harder to write it that way. And Apple basically, when they demo the string catalog feature, they always say just write save, just write save. And that's a thing I'm actually working and thinking about to solve with a macro actually later. I'm playing around with that. And my idea is that you could write save and a key, so you get the best of both worlds. But that's something that I'm still experimenting with. Currently, you just write save. That's basically the best practice Apple wants us to use, because then everything looks also nice in code and you kind of know what that is. And specifically the issues with context. If you're using Xcode, and I have this app that I mentioned that I'm writing right now, TranslateKit. I have built a free feature in that. Everybody can use that for free, where you have a menu bar entry where you can search for common text like save. And then you get the official translations from Apple, so you don't get the wrong context in those cases. Yeah, that's something I would recommend really to everybody. It's really a free feature, and yeah, that's basically how those context things I'm trying to solve with my tools. But Apple wants us not to write keys, and you can still write them. You will get the key, and you can still provide a different value for the English, but then it's extra work.
I see. Okay. When do I start doing this? Like, I'm writing an app for something, and I'm just like basically writing my first views in SwiftUI. Is that the correct time when I start localization, or should I maybe wait until version 1 is out and I have like, or I have some kind of MVP, or like when is the correct time to actually like start with localization?
Well, as I said, localization is more or less automatic nowadays. So if you are working like with Ruby on Rails with other tools, I would still recommend you start doing this from day one. So the localization later becomes easier. So you use, for example, in Ember, you just write T and then your key name. T stands for translate. It's just to, so you have to type less. But in SwiftUI, you get this for free. You don't have to do anything. You just use your SwiftUI code and it already extracts it to the string catalog if you have one. And that's my recommendation is create a string catalog. Even if you just have an app for English, just create a string catalog. You're not going to have any disadvantages. The only change you have if you have one language, only English, and a string catalog is that you can see what Xcode automatically already detects as localizable. Because you will see some entries you don't want there, and you will see entries that you're missing that you actually expected there, because SwiftUI does that all. But what if you have localized strings in your model, in your business logic, and stuff like that? I used to have, for example, often I have enums. For example, if I have a picker and you can choose several options for some option in some app, I create an enum for that. I make it case iterable so I can easily walk through that in my picker. And in that case, I conform my enum type to custom string convertible, which means you have to write a computer property name description. And then I do a switch I do a switch case over self. And then what do you return there? You don't have localized string key there. And those kinds of things, if you want to notice them right from the get-go, I recommend just create your string catalog, even if you just localize for nothing more than English, so you can see what it detects.
Okay, that's pretty cool. That, by the way, is also kind of how the telemetry deck front-end web interface is currently written, because that is written in Ember. We do have a equivalent to the string catalog, but it is just an English version right now.
That's fine. That's exactly what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say you should do from the
Yeah.
get-go. So when you want to localize, it's much easier.
Yeah, because that's a lesson that I already learned, partially from you, because you and I, we used to work together on a project a few years ago, and that was actually a lot of fun.
Nice to hear.
By the way, people in the audience, feel free to just like jump in with questions. Like we won't prod you for questions, but if you hear something and are like, wait, I want to hear more about this or whatever, just write a question in the Q&A. All right, so we're saying, okay, let's start with the localization scaffolding, let's say. Let's start with that as soon as possible, just while you're starting your development. When is then the correct time to add another language? Because that's also a question that I'm asking myself with the telemetry deck dashboard frontend right now.
Well, it depends. At the end, it depends on what your goals are for like who do you want to reach. If you are writing for example, for a professional target group, which TranslateKit itself is written for developers. So I asked myself the question, should I localize it even? Because developers, especially Swift and Xcode, but they have to speak English because everything is in English. Like Xcode is in English. I localized it to all languages. Xcode is localized too. So just English. And that's exactly the question you have to ask yourself. So what is your target group? And if you have it localized for everyone in your target group, it's already localized. I consider that already localized. And yeah, that's my guidance basically. You have to just think about, okay, for example, telemetry deck is now currently only in English. Do you need it to be in German? Probably yes, because there are going to be a lot of businesses in Germany, for example, businesses in other countries. You do want to reach them as well. Like their marketing, maybe developers all speak English or kind of understand it enough, but the marketing team maybe doesn't. And they are used to maybe working in other languages. And if you want to reach them as well, at some point you have to localize it. And it really depends on when you want to start growing to more countries.
Right. Especially like, developers, if you're only targeting developers, they're kind of like pilots, maybe. They all kind of have to speak at least a certain subset of English. And that's also the reason why currently telemetry deck is not localized to more than one language. But yeah, that's exactly the thought I also had. Whereas like, if I want to reach marketing people, if I want to reach deciders, then suddenly that that doesn't count anymore. Like it's not only developers, and so this English only thing doesn't count anymore. So at some point we're gonna have to think about that.
Yeah, for sure.
Chris has a question. Chris Wakefield asks, how about localization when it comes to app names, in brackets iOS? Should these also be translated, or is this also done automatically by Apple?
Oh, it's not done by Apple for sure. So if you have an app, for example, let's say TranslateKit, or I have my crossword puzzle game. It's called Crosscraft, and then it has a column and says custom crosswords. If I don't localize it myself, it will be custom crosswords in every country in the world. And I do want to localize it. So like at least like maybe not the name itself, but at least the words after it, which basically, it's basically an ASO topic, an App Store optimization topic, where you try to put keywords in your app name and in your subtitle and in your keywords themselves, which help with users finding your app. So this is also an ASO question, not just a accessibility and localization question. But to just answer the question, no, they don't localize automatically. On Android, I've heard that they have on Google Play, on the store, they have a button for localizing, but I'm not sure if that works, because I heard also from some people that it doesn't really work. But you can just use machine translators or ask for someone for translating your app name, and that's something I would recommend for ASO.
Fantastic. Yeah, but that makes that makes a lot of sense. So this isn't done automatically, but you have the option to set different localized app store titles and app titles. So that is it the same? Is it the same for whatever is underneath the app icon on your springboard, or is that is not the same string as displayed in the app store?
It's not.
Correct?
It's not. Yeah, that's like technically it's the CF bundle name, which you can set in Xcode somewhere, and you can also localize it. So maybe one thing to mention here is if you localize your app, you typically have a string catalog named localizable.exe strings. The exe strings is the ending for string catalogs. But if you want to localize stuff like that, you typically do it in the info plist file. And you can localize that as well. And you can basically, how an app works nowadays in Xcode is you also create an additional string catalog just for the info plist. Then it's just called info plist dot exe strings. But Xcode does that, like it will suggest it, or you can look it up also. But that's how it works.
Cool. I like that. So we talked about when to add another language. Which languages should I add? I think I have a good answer to that, but I also want to hear what you think about that.
Okay, yeah, for me, there are two things to consider when asking yourself like what languages you want to add, maybe three even. But the main two are how many people speak that language. So you basically reach more people. And if you go by that, like you have to definitely add Chinese, for example. You need to add Hindi, you need to add Spanish, which is spoken in many countries. You need to add Arabic, stuff like that. If you go by, the other thing you can go by is by income, like which countries have most income, which are buying most, and yeah, which can grow your business most. And there you will have other countries, there are European countries most. You can go to Japan. You can, again, China is also a growing market, and definitely you have to localize for English, obviously. But those are the two things that you need to consider. And I've actually built into my app TranslateKit, when you choose, like you can choose the languages you want to translate it to there. And I actively list the number of speakers, so you can easily see like which language is spoken.
Smart.
I just thought that helps with the decision making, so that's what I'm putting there. Yeah, another thing that I would consider there is that probably other companies like Apple themselves or Google, they have already figured out which languages you should localize, like their app, what they should localize their apps to. So another thing that I could recommend is just follow their languages, because they have already done the work to see, okay, which languages are most spoken, which languages bring the most income. And Apple, for example, it translates iOS to 38 languages. And again, I have just added a button in my app where you can just say same as iOS, and then you get the exact same 38 languages. And right beside the button, you can also see an info icon, which you can click, which brings you to the website where you can see the exact languages listed. Yeah, Apple documents it in there in some support document. And that's what I would suggest. If you want to add the next language, just look where do you think your target audience can be most. If you just want to add many languages at once, just follow Apple, basically. What is your take on it?
I mean, that basically I'm using the same thought process. But what I also want to show real quick is a data-driven approach, basically. So this is if you integrate telemetry deck into any app, then it will automatically send locales. And a locale is basically a combination of a language translation that the OS is set to, and also like a set of how do you say this? How do I define this? A set of formatting and info things for a country. Like, for example, here in Germany, we format our dates and our numbers slightly different than if I were in the US, for example. And so I already have this here, but let me just create a new one to tell everyone how this works. So what I would do is I would just create a new insight, make it a breakdown, because I want a breakdown of all my locales. And then I'm going to pick locale as the breakdown dimension. And this is what I get. I also want to count users and not signals. And this is what I get. So this is Telemetry Viewer, the Telemetry Deck iOS app, which is half dead, but not completely dead. I know it's not working right now. And so we see that most people who are using the app are English speakers or have their phones set to English, so EN, and are also in an English country like US or ENGB, for example. But then the next demographic is ENDE, which means people like me who live in Germany, or we presume live in Germany, but have their phone set to English, which is, I think, not completely uncommon, especially for developers. And it actually continues. Like, these are English-speaking people from Australia. This is Sweden, I presume. France, still English. So we're like almost 2/3 around the circle, and I haven't seen anything that's not English. And I think English Austria, English Canada, English US with some kind of addition, English Netherlands.
Does it send the settings of the app or the preferred language settings of the device?
The latter.
Okay.
But yeah,
okay.
so there are a few non-English locales in there, but there are a few. And so actually, if I look at this overview here, this is the same data, but for all apps that are inside of that are being managed by Telemetry Deck. And there we actually see, for example, DEDE, where people are actually in Germany and are setting their phones to German. So this is not something that is completely impossible. It's just that for the people who use Telemetry Deck, especially who use very obscure iOS viewer app, which I kind of have to discourage you to do, but yeah, I know. It is very that's kind of why I don't localize them yet. I'm not saying this has to happen, never, but it will. I have a bit more time, I think, and I think especially for developer tools that is fine. But if you're not making a developer tool, then totally. So I think, yeah, if you look at the data that you have, Jeehut, and also the thoughts that you have about like buying power and stuff like that, you can add a bit of data to the decision. Like if you know, oh, so many people who are using my app are from France, then like French is your next. Then French is of course your next localization target. All right, someone wrote locale is region plus language. Yeah, that's probably the correct definition. So region settings. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you basically said how to do what I suggested with like the next country is what the target audience, where do you want to grow, basically your target audience. And you know where your target audience is by analyzing the data that like you just showed, where you can see, even if you have your app not localized in other languages than English, you will still see the countries that it's being used from and the languages they have set their devices for, because you can like see the preferred languages in a device, and the topmost preferred language is probably the one that you want to localize to. And yeah, makes sense to analyze that.
Pretty much. How does it look like? Like, how does your typical development workflow look like with a localized app? Like, say you're adding a new feature or whatever. Like, yeah, what happens? What's your thought process and actually work process?
It used to be different. Like with my previous app, RemafoX, you had to actively use that app to create those keys and stuff like that. Nowadays, I'm not really thinking about it at all. I'm just writing my stuff in English, and I'm following this new approach where you don't write semantic keys, you just write safe and stuff like that. The only thing that I do is when I have a text that I think is a common text, like we said, safe, cancel, done, or there are more less obvious things like learn more or terms and conditions and stuff like that. I just look it up with my app because it has the 1,500 most common translations built in, and I get for free. I get the entire official translations that Apple is also using,
Oh,
and
smart.
that's actually something that Apple wants us to do because they're sharing these localizations. Maybe you know the website applelocalizations.com, which is created by an amazing person in our community. And these data that is used there for this website is shared by Apple officially on developer.apple.com. So they want us to be consistent with the system. And that's exactly the only thing that I'm doing is that. Otherwise, I'm just writing my code. There are a few things related to business logic. Like I said, when I have my enum and I want some text, like a description for my enum cases, I have to mark them as localizable. And I do that from the get-go. And you can do that easily by just saying string, opening brace, and then you use the parameter localized. So you say string localized colon, and then you put your string there. If you do this, then Xcode again will detect automatically that this is a localizable text, and it will add it to your string catalog. And the reversed, well, which I'm sometimes doing when I'm in SwiftUI, and I want a text to be not localized, which is often the case when for example, when I create a text field, for some reason, the first string you put there is, I think on the Mac at least, or on some platform, the first string you put there, it's not shown anywhere. I think it's just for accessibility. And sometimes I'm just putting an empty string there, and then this empty string gets added to the string catalog, which is a bummer. And to exclude that, I have to explicitly make it non-localizable because by default, SwiftUI things will always localize. And there are two ways to do that. The first that Apple obviously recommends is to use a text with the initializer verbatim. So you can use text verbatim, which is great if you are using a text, but if you're using any other SwiftUI view like label or button, you have to then use their label overload, and then you have to create a text there, which I find a bit cumbersome. And there's a small cheat that I want to share here is you can basically, whenever you want to tell the Swift compiler that what you have there is a string and not a localized string key, you can just explicitly use the string initializer. You can just say string, opening braces, put your string there, and you will get the exclusion of localization for free. That's like a trick
Oh,
that I would like to share here.
smart.
And those are the things that I consider. Otherwise, I just code and make sure that I use formatters, which is a very important topic.
Formatters for dates, for numbers, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for dates, for numbers, for lists, which is also not often known. Like if you list a set of things, like, I don't know, apple, comma, bananas, comma, and then oranges. In English, you write the comma and then an and. In German, for example, you would not write the comma. You would just say apples, comma, bananas, and oranges. So there are even differences in localization when it comes to list formatting. And there is a list formatter. You just use list formatter and then just say format string from, and then you get a proper
that's pretty neat.
formatting.
I didn't even know that. And yes, we know about the Oxford comma. This is not an Oxford comma discussion webinar. The next one will be. He lied.
Okay.
So how about like one thing that I've kind of thought about when you said like, oh yeah, I just use the normal English language in my SwiftUI. What happens if I change the English copy or if I have a very long text? Like, for example, I have an app with a welcome screen, and the welcome screen is very wordy, and it says like, hi, welcome to my app. This is cool. I like my app. I'm Daniel. I like biking and orange things. And then after version 2.0, I want to add I like biking and also, I don't know, programming and orange things. I've now changed the key. correct?
Yeah, yeah.
And
There
also,
are
like, I
the
have this huge key in my
Sure.
localizable file, which is also kind of bummer, right?
Yeah, it really doesn't hurt that you have a long key. That's the new approach. Like I said, I'm going to work on a macro maybe to like to separate the key from the English default that you want to have in your code. Maybe that's going to fix it. But for now, there you have two options. You can either change your text right in your code. In that case, the key would change, which is also great in string catalogs because your old key automatically gets marked as stale. So
Okay.
it gets like a yellow marking there, and then you can delete it. And if you delete stale localization from one language, it deletes it from all. So it's really cool to use that. And you would still have a new key and it needs to be retranslated then. What you could do instead is you could just go to your string catalog, select the English language, and you even in the English language, you have the key and a value. You could go into the value and change that if you don't want to change the other, if you don't want basically to have a new key.
Right.
But in both cases, like if you use something like TranslateKit, which can machine translate your string catalogs, in both cases, you will get all the other languages translated again. Because what string catalogs and Xcode does when you change just the value in your English text, it marks all the other languages for this key as needs review. And if a text is marked as needs a review, then my tool by default translates it. You can change the setting, but by default it would retranslate it, and therefore you would get, like, if you change the English text, you would get it retranslated in all the languages.
Using machine translation.
Yeah, you can also go through it manually. Like I said, you find them easily because they are marked as needs review.
Right. Does this work with like localization? How are these called? Agencies, I assume, like companies where you send the localization files, and or does it work with these websites where if you're an open source project, you upload your strings files and then kind of the community helps you localize stuff?
It depends on how you upload the localizations there. Most of them don't support string catalogs directly, like most tools like Phrase, Localize, Transifex, and stuff like that. Those are the localization services. Most of them have command line tools and stuff, and they can handle strings files and string date files. I haven't checked them all, but last time I checked, they were not migrated to string catalogs at all yet. So what you could do is you could extract your localizations using, there's like a menu in Xcode to extract it as an XC log file. I think that's the thing. And you could upload that. And in that case, I'm assuming that Xcode does the right thing and will somehow add them there again. But I have never used the XC log extraction because I've always been using BartyCrouch and machine translations and all my own tools. So I'm not an expert on that specifically, but I'm assuming that there are going to be some options.
Yeah, I actually have used them. They're a bit cumbersome, but what they give you is you suddenly, if you have these file formats, these XClog file formats, you suddenly have a huge number of tools that have nothing to do with iOS or Mac or Apple development, but have everything to do like with professional translators and interpreters and stuff like that. And so there's actually a lot of, like, if you can't find a tool in the Apple ecosystem, it sometimes is a good idea to then search for XClog plus your problem or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, if you're working like for a large company, you probably already have some localization service built or recommended by your company that is being used for all the products you have. And specifically for larger companies, it's also no problem to pay like official localizers to do their translations. And in that case, probably your company is gonna want you to do that. And you can totally do that in that case. My apps are also more targeted towards indie developers and smaller companies.
What else
Sorry to barge in. We have a question.
Please.
Oh, two questions because the second one just came in. The first one. When I import localizations to Xcode, is there a way to mark new or changed translations with some label, like needs review, for example?
You mean like within XClog file, I'm assuming, because I don't know other ways to import. I don't really know, but the XClog file is a standardized format. And it's a format that I don't think has considered the latest features in Xcode. So I'm not really sure if that's an option to do that with the needs review. I would assume that
just the onboard Xcode onboard, like you said something about like marking strings as stale, correct? So maybe he also, like Chris also wants to talk about this.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if I understand the question in that case. You could feel free to make it more specific, but in general, I think the newer stuff with the different markings, I don't think they are supported because even with strings files and string text files, there was never a way to mark something as stale or as needs review and stuff like that. So I'm assuming it's going to always import as confirmed.
Yeah, probably. Also, the XClog files, what they do is they have their own workflows, basically. So they have, you can add annotations and stuff like that for the translators to those files. So you could add the needs review in there. But what you typically do if you are in a XClog style workflow is by the time you get the finished files to import into Xcode, they're all approved. Like, so that's done. Like the only thing that is left is to just like actually look at the strings inside your application, like as it is running. But yeah, usually the workflow, if you are using XClog file, which you probably won't. So this is like, I don't know, like the backup. Do whatever Cihat says, not what I say in this case. The format supports via various like translation hints and labels, but yeah, the workflow is different, and I think most people in this webinar should go with the workflow that Cihat has provided.
The person just tried to make it clearer. I'm going to read it out to you. For example, you already have a localization in German. Later, you send Xclog to a translator and import it back to Xcode. I don't see what's changed. I only can see changes in Git, but it's not super comfortable.
Yeah, I think that's just as it is.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any comfort features here.
Yeah, the XClog file is just a compatibility thing. It's just still there. I don't think they have changed much with how string catalogs work. String catalogs themselves are basically what Apple recommends, and I would also recommend using that if you can.
Okay, then the second answer. Any suggestions for localizing icons? For example, a $ icon to yen sign.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a bigger topic in itself because localization is not only about text, it's also about images, it's also about examples. For example, I can give an example from my app, my crossword puzzle game, because in my paywall, in my crossword puzzle game, I have an image at the top, which should like showcase where you would use it. And I have basically a family gathered together at Christmas. Someone is wearing like a Christmas hat and stuff like that, which is basically what I was thinking of. And I released the app around Christmas. So that was kind of the thing why I did it. But if I want to localize this app for, I don't know, for Turkey, for example, I should probably put something else there. And so images even need to sometimes to be localized. An icon is exactly like that. So if you have like a dollar icon, you could think about localizing it. But my basic idea or my basic advice for localization is think about accessibility. And especially if you're an indie or a smaller company, think about accessibility first and think about, okay, will people understand my app still if I don't localize a specific part? So if you don't localize the image, if you don't localize the icon, will people still understand that what you mean is money? If what you mean is just money, I don't think you need to localize it. It will be nice if we would still localize it though, but I think you could save time there. If what you're trying to say is just money, if you're trying to say change currency from dollar to something else, obviously you have to definitely make sure that then the icon is correct.
Right.
Thank you.
So that gives you also a clear priority, like localize the text first, then any icons, images, and pictures that are like hindrances, like barriers to accessibility, and then you're down to the nice to haves, kind of where you're like, okay, if I make this, for example, in Turkey, I assume, I don't know, what is a Turkish Eid maybe or something.
Yeah, Ramadan.
You would probably say like have like a Ramadan or Eid related picture or something, because that gives you the same feeling of like, okay, now I'm meeting my family and hanging out and having nice food and stuff like that.
Yeah. people will be able to, they feel represented, which is an important feeling, and they can identify with, especially in your paywall. Like in my paywall, I'm definitely going to adjust it, but maybe not in every screen you have to adjust it. And another thing I will definitely make sure to get right is examples. Oftentimes we have like text fields, and inside the text fields, we have example content. Like again, for my crossword puzzle game, you can add your own questions when you create crossword puzzles. And I have the example where I say, mom's favorite actor. And then the example is Brad Pitt, like e.g. mom's favorite actor, e.g. Brad Pitt. And maybe Brad Pitt maybe is international enough that I can just keep it like that. But probably more moms are fans of Shah Rukh Khan in India, for example. So maybe I should put a different example there. So think also about the things you list as examples, because it's all about understanding it immediately. And if they have to think about, who's Brad Pitt again? Okay, maybe Brad Pitt is too known. But yeah, I think you get the idea.
Yeah, you want, like, if you have to translate it in your head again, then it's probably not properly localized. There was a fun example in the German localization of Microsoft Windows a few versions back. I don't know exactly, but if you right-click a file on Windows, it offers to compress the file. But it just doesn't say compress the file; it says zip the file, and it would be translated with the German word for postcode.
Oh,
You would right-click a file and it would say postcode this file.
Postal code. Yeah, that's a nice one.
Because zip and
Yeah.
postcode, right?
Yeah, you have to get the context right. And that's also like for my TranslateKit app, I'm also thinking about it because you will have text in some places and the machine translator will just not get the context right, like you just said. And they might have actually used their own machine translator. I mean, they have a machine translator for that. Or maybe the translator just got it right themselves. Like you need, sometimes you need a comment, and sometimes you just need the context of the app in general. And what I'm considering there is in a future version is to just add an open AI integration. So you basically, my app could automatically feed ChatGPT with all the keys in one prompt or something, so it understands the context, and then I say like, hey, try to correct the context if there is an issue, or try to find issues with context. Maybe that's something that's automatable as well, and I'm going to work on that, but it's not there yet. But it's definitely something you need to take care. And if you're using an official localizer, make sure to add a comment to make, especially for short text, make the context clear.
Right.
Or just use the common translations from my app.
Yeah, but adding context is probably a good idea also for these things. I completely agree. That will help either automated tools or human people.
Yeah. But what I used to do with machine translation is where after it's translated, I check a few languages that I speak myself, like I speak German, and then I can check if the translation in German typically is wrong. Probably machine translator also got other languages wrong. And then what I like to do is I change the English text to be more clear somehow, and then I retranslate it. And that way I get better translation. That's maybe a small thing you can do if you're an indie.
Fantastic. What else do we have? We've translated or localized images. We've localized text. You mentioned briefly that we also have like formatters for dates and lists. Any pitfalls here, or is it just like, oh yeah, throw in your dates into the formatter and it will usually work?
Well, there are different kinds of formats, but if you don't change anything, the default's typically going to render in something that makes sense. So if you have like a date formatter, you can just say date formatter for a string from, and then you pass it a date and you will get something that makes sense. You will want to sometimes just show the time or just show the date, in which case you can set up the formatter. But it's become even easier than that nowadays because you don't have to create a date formatter anymore. Instead, what you can do, that's like a newer feature, I believe in Foundation, you can just use your date and you just can call formatted on it.
Right.
And this formatted function even gets some parameters. You can pass it the time style and the date style, and you can pass also omitted as a style. So you can basically get only the date by passing omitted for the time. And that's a very common thing I'm using all the time. If you need a specific format, then it's a little bit different. You need to really use still the date formatters, number formatters, etc. But in most cases, you can really get far with just .formatted, which you can just call whenever you have integers and other stuff in your text.
All right, awesome. What about plurals? I know that plurals are hard because different languages have different ways to pluralize. Like
Yeah.
English, for example, is pretty easy because most of the time I just add an S, but sometimes I like switch a Y out with an IE, for example. Other languages, like Polish has, I think, 3 plurals.
At least, yeah, more, I
And
think.
there's at least one other Eastern European language that has like even more plurals, depending on like how many things or people you're talking about.
I think Polish is really one of the bad guys there. There are languages in general, like Arabic has 6 cases, so you can really have 6. And it's really, there's no easy rule to always find them. There is like a table somewhere where I found some rules that are generally available, but it's a really complicated table. And for example, Polish, I think, or some other Slavian-based languages, they have some rules where when you have 15, it's different when you have 11, like because it ends with a 1, it's different. But again, when it's 100, it's not that rule anymore. It's a bit like the leap years rule, where you have like every 4 years you have you know what I mean? Every 4 years, and then every 100 years is not anymore, and every 400 years it's again. So that kind of rules, there are languages where you have these. And what I did with TranslateKit to make this as simple as possible is basically I have looked up that table and I have built all the possible cases. And what I do when I find a pluralized text, what is a pluralized text first? Maybe I can first. So if you have a text in your button or label where you say like something like you say a text and then you have a string with a interpolated number. For example, count users have subscribed to or registered for the webinar. Like you have the count, which is a variable. And Xcode actually automatically detects that this is a variable, and it automatically does all the right things to make sure it gets replaced as a parameter. Because if you put a number, what you need to do in localization is you need to, instead of the variable, which is a number, you need to place the text %LLD. D stands for decimal, LL stands for long, long. You have like % long, long decimal. And there are others like %ads is probably more known, which is for general text, but there are others like %.2f, which is for floating numbers and that you want to round to 2, stuff like that. And Xcode figures that out for you and places it there. And if you have numbers in particular and you have like 5 user, 5 user will be wrong, 5 users will be correct. That's pluralization. And my tool TranslateKit absolutely supports that, and it automatically puts the right cases in the right languages. For example, for Arabic, it will choose an example from all the 6 cases, put the number with the example in the text, and send that to the machine translator so that the machine translator knows, okay, I have to translate now 15 people have registered, and hopefully it translates it correctly. And then when it translates that correctly, I know, okay, for the case where one example is 15, I'm putting that translation. I'm basically back replacing that number 15 with the %LLD in that case. Sounds a bit complicated, but basically it automatically does it for you. You're muted?
I'm muted again, because it was clearing my throat. So what you're saying is this sounds incredibly complicated, but in practice, it doesn't.
Well, string catalogs also
isn't.
make it easy to mark a text as one thing that's still complicated is you have to manually mark a text as pluralized. It doesn't do it automatically. You have to, if you have a text like % blah blah blah, not %. If you have a text like count users registered, where you know, okay, if I have the 1 case there, it's going to be user, not users. Then you should go into your string catalog, right-click that key, and say vary by plural. That's a very simple button there. If you do that, it automatically adds the right ones for English. You just see 1, that's the 1 case, and other, which is all other cases. And it also, if you look into the other languages, you will see it automatically added the right plurals for those languages. And that's easy. But if you like already had some texts that were already pluralized and you wanted to add new languages, then it would not really work that easily. So that's what my app also fixes there. But yeah, don't forget to mark your pluralizable text as plurals.
All right, cool. I think we're nearing the end of our time slot. What is something you really want to leave people with? Like, do you want to, for example, give a quick demo, or do you want to like give our viewers like something to take home with them? Like something some
I think
lesson that you learned.
I think too, we just talked about things where I have two things in mind that we haven't covered, and I have two things that I want to talk about that are not solved in localization anywhere at all.
Mhm.
So firstly, we just talked about pluralization, but there's also in general parameters. So if you have this thing like a count in your strings that are localized, you have something like string interpolation there, and that's like for dynamic values, you can use that. And that gets automatically handled by the Xcode basically. But you have to always think about, okay, this is how it works, and your parameters they work and they get automatically worked up properly. But when parameters get machine translated, like you have a %add somewhere in your string, a machine translator might break that parameter. Or even if you send it to a human to translate it, they often break those parameters. You have %add maybe in your code, and they add like a white space there, %white space add, because they think, in my language, you add a white space there. I found that when you machine translate to Japanese, it even completely deletes the parameters. They're completely gone. And what I've done there is I automatically check for the parameters in the source language, and I make sure that all the other languages have the same parameters. And common problems like white space between % and add, I automatically repair that in my app string translate kit. But the other cases where I can't automatically repair it, I at least show a warning. So you can see exactly in which languages the parameters are not matching your source language. That's definitely something you should consider. And I am currently working on a new feature that is going to be completely free, where you can drag and drop your string catalogs into TranslateKit, and it just opens an editor, which is better than the Xcode built-in editor because it shows you stuff like these warnings. So I definitely recommend everyone who's seeing this, check out my app TranslateKit for this free feature, which I'm currently working on, which is going to be shipped sometime later this week. Yeah, that's for parameters.
You had
And
one other thing,
yeah.
the thing that you really wanted to give or to talk about, right? If I understood you correctly just now.
That's one of those things, yeah.
Also, if
And
people do have questions for Cihat or for me, then now's the time to really ask them before we close this session.
I will come in with one question.
All right.
Because I was coming into this webinar and thinking, where do I have ever seen any localization issues in my life? And the first thing that came to my mind was during checkout, for example, when I have to use like address fields, because that's when I, as a normal person, see this the most. That I when I try to like type in my address and then I see, oh, that's not the right language I'm using here, like the localization, and I switch it, and the address fields don't change because they just keep it like the field, but they rename it, like they say, like instead of street they say Straße in German, for example, but the fields stay the same. Like there's maybe
right, because like especially in, for example, American post addresses look differently, are formatted differently.
Yeah.
I assume Estonian post addresses look differently because the order is different, or you might add the postcode afterwards, or there might be a different ID somewhere or something like that. Like I've noticed this in the Apple Contacts app, where you can add addresses for people, and if you pick the country for the address first, the whole view changes because all the fields rearrange, and that's really cool. So that's an example of localization that probably can't be done automatically.
Well, it's also a standardization question, because there is the ISO, which is supposed to standardize these kinds of stuff, and there is a standard even for addresses, but the standard is like the common ground for all countries in the world, and for some countries it might not work perfectly. And I've seen many apps that don't even follow that standard. So I think that's the first thing you should do if you have addresses and things like that. Make sure to check out the official international standards for which fields you need, and make sure to implement them, so you don't run into issues like you don't find some fields at all. But if you have the time, you can also invest extra time to do what Apple has done. I hope there's going to be some system feature there, though. I think this is something that should be fixed by something like a library. You just add to your apps, because not every app should redo that over and over again.
Awesome. Someone in the chat says, technically, there's an international standard for address fields. We in Germany always make the mistake of having a separate field for house number, which is against that standard.
True.
Yeah, like rebel Germans.
Yeah, one more thing I wanted to say that I often hear, for example, Paul Hudson has recently recommended that, and I'm not, basically my opinion there is a little different. It's inflection. In languages you have now, for example, in string, you can use some weird format with string interpolation where you can say like, okay, this word is actually pluralizable. Please pluralize it automatically for me. And it's called string, it's called inflection. You can Google it, you will find it. But I recommend against using that because firstly, it's hard to get right in all languages. So maybe they will even have some edge cases where it doesn't work. And secondly, because probably the first reason why you shouldn't use that, it only works in a few languages. It's like for 5, 6, I think they added 2 more languages last year. Definitely less than 10 languages where this works, and you will still have a lot of languages where it just doesn't work. So you're better off pluralizing manually.
All right, cool. Good to know.
One other question is, so what I heard during this webinar is that the string catalogs are the way to go, basically. This may be more a question for Jeehut, but what would be like a perfect way, like for in the future, to make localization more accessible for devs as well, you know? What is your vision there?
I think my vision starts with my app. Like I have the vision that everything should be automated. And I have lots of features planned for my app. For example, as an indie, what I would like to have is that other indies who are, I'm from Germany, I can check German text, and there are other indies from other countries who can check other texts, other languages. So why is there not a community feature where I can easily contact another developer or another indie that has an app maybe that he wants to have or she wants to have localized in German, so I can help them and they can help me. That's like a feature that I want to build into my app later this year. That's like the direction I want to go is automate everything as much as possible and increase the accuracy at the same time. That's basically my goal, because my goal is every app should be localized. And I hear always excuses, yeah, it takes so much time. I'm working on it. I'm trying to we'll make a way with all the excuses to not translate your apps. So my vision is that at some point we're going to have everything automated, and I think AI is going to help there as well. As I said, I'm experimenting with ChatGPT, and you can already use it as like a second check. You can even just copy your stuff there. By the way, string catalogs are just JSON, so you could just copy a string catalog, and probably ChatGPT will more or less understand most of it.
Cool. So your vision is more AI, but also more community, so people can help each other.
Intelligence, both human and artificial.
Intelligence, yeah, I like that. Sometimes the human intelligence still needs to double check the artificial intelligence.
There are 2 things that are not covered by localization at all, not by anyone. I have never seen anything there. And those are first politeness levels. Like, for example, DeepL does support like a politer and less polite level, but there is no system feature for that. You have to always do it yourself manually. If you want to, for example, give the user the option, maybe even choose their politeness level and stuff like that. There is no such thing like that. And a similar thing for like gender, for profiles. In German specifically, we have many different ways you can try to approach everybody. And like you can use a star, an underscore. What Apple does is use a colon, for example. But there is no way to even tell your localizers like how to do it automatically.
Right.
You can't change it in the app. You can't do much there.
Right.
And I think this is all related also to localization. And especially, for example, in Japanese, you want to choose your politeness level. They have like many politeness levels and not just 1 or 2. And I think there should be some kind of global standard or setting there. And if there is not going to be one, I'm going to just try to create one maybe next year or in 2 years from now. Like my long-term vision is to solve those 2 problems as well.
Fantastic. I'm very much looking forward to welcoming you in a year and then talking about the progress you've made. Because
hopefully, yeah.
Like you've been pushing forward the standard in localization for years now. And yeah, you're definitely the localization guy now. And I can't wait to see what you're building in the future. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We will send out in the next few days a link to the recording of this webinar. It's going to be on YouTube. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're going to send out an email with a telemetry deck code for 2 months off for any new paid plans. So use that if you want to try out telemetry deck and haven't yet. Cihat, do you want to tell people where people can find you online? Where can people follow you? Also, anything else that we want to leave our friends with?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter or X, on Mastodon, and on Threads. You can always find me with @Jeehut, J-E like Jesus, and then E Hut like Pizza Hut. And probably most people here follow me already, but on YouTube, maybe you don't. If you want to check out my apps or my blog, I also write articles about stuff that I'm learning. Just go to my blog or website, fline.dev, Fline.dev. And yeah, that's it, I think.
Fantastic. Next up is, oh yeah, I'm kind of Lisa posted this in the chat. So our next webinar is May 17. I'll sign up for that soon. It's about GDPR pitfalls with user registration. So if you register a user, or if you actually collect user data, then you gotta know these GDPR things, which we know all about. All right, have a fantastic day, everyone, and see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.